Everyone, and welcome. This is obviously our first confab of 2025, so it should be a lot of fun to start off with kind of really the predictions that we're looking at in the future here when it comes to business systems and technology, and really what we see businesses really using kind of moving forward here as we look obviously into 2025, and what we feel investment-wise you should be considering obviously kind of as you're going through some of the planning maybe for Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, obviously for 2025. So looks like Rob's on. Yep, got Mario Kart, right? We've got to go back to our roots with the Nintendo 64 days. It was kind of funny. I was at the Mall of America recently, and I was sitting eating, and I had a waiter come over and basically ask me what my favorite Mario Kart game was. And he loved the, if I remember correctly, there's a Mario Kart Double Dash or something like that where you could have two characters. So yeah, Rob, you're right. Zelda is kind of where my favorite is for sure. Clyde, good to see you as well, sir. Glad to have everyone starting to join here. It's been, like I said, just a busy time, I think, for everyone, right? With all the weather systems that are going on, with all the holidays. It's really good just to be back, to be able to obviously focus on really those kind of next steps in business. And I'm going to tell you, 2025, if it's anything like 2024, it's going to be fast. We'll just say it that way. There's a lot of technologies that are coming down the pike that obviously can influence businesses and what they're going to be investing in, and there's a lot of emergent technologies in 2024 that really started to stabilize a little bit more in terms of what those capabilities are, the understanding of how to use them, and then obviously as well the implementation of some of those with a lot of proof of concepts I know as well that were tackled. But today what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit more specifically on what technology, more specifically, we really feel is going to have a major influence, obviously, in your business. So with that, let's go ahead and just kind of do some framing here so that everyone kind of knows what Confab is, if this is your first time joining us. Basically, Confab is a bi-weekly event that we put on that allows us to have a very candid conversation regarding business systems and technology. It's, you know, you think about it, business systems isn't the most fun career for a lot of people to pick. You're constantly dealing with things like development or project management, so it's not like you're acting or you're in the arts for it. But I will say that candidly, like it's how you approach something, right? And what I mean by that is that there is a lot of art in the technology space. There's a lot of concepts and ideas, and there's a lot of ways to tackle different types of challenges. And I think that there's a lot of people like me that are very passionate, not about business systems per se, because accounting, right? Like, I get it, GL, APAR, but more about the impact to you as the end user, being able to use something, to create something. I will tell you, probably the most fun times I have ever had inside of the business system space is when I'm working with people and they understand a concept. And that concept then goes further where it helps them accomplish the goal that they're trying to get to. And that goal could be monetary, that goal could be personal, meaning maybe they want more free time, family oriented. There's many different factors that impact that, right? And so Confab here is about having that conversation where you can log in to LinkedIn, to Twitch, or to YouTube, place a comment, and then interact with us because we have a lot of our team members on here as well. So that being said, if you're not chatting, make sure you introduce yourself. If you're on LinkedIn, go ahead and post a comment real quick. And if you're in Twitch or YouTube, feel free to put a comment as well. I'm really curious on what you think in the next couple minutes here as I go through our introduction, but I'm really curious on what you think is going to be the 2025 impact in terms of the technology that's going to be the most prominent. And I think most of you are going to nail it, but I'm curious on how definitive you can be with it. So last year, let's start there. We did the recap at the end of the year. If you didn't make it, basically what we did is we went through, I'll just kind of highlight it here on the computer screen. Let me go ahead and flip over to my presentation. You can see here that we had our PowerPoint that we went through. We basically confirmed some of the technologies that were emergent or were developing inside of 2024 and really focused then obviously on, you know, what is going to be that primary emergent technology. So just as an example, example, IoT, which was actually pretty big. We had more companies ask about connecting devices or using those devices for things like machine automation, like actually taking, for example, a punch press and monitoring how many punches it does, or even then feeding that data back into Dynamics 365 to actually go through and then run, as you can imagine, maybe some of the posting routines to actually report output or to consume product to a production order. So there's a lot of IoT involvement that really evolved over time here that is just becoming a bigger part of the story. And you've heard me say it many, many times, when you have devices like this that are basically a buck that you can add that can connect with Wi-Fi, really it's an engineering dilemma then in terms of how you're going to tackle it, because the technology and the capabilities are already there. How do you incorporate that into your product? So IoT was a really big one that we looked at. Data and storage was another big one. This year, for example, at Stoneridge, our data practice just skyrocketed in terms of capabilities and need. And we've got a lot of great leaders now that are pushing forward with the analytical perspective of reporting and coming up with structures, for example, where you don't just report directly out of the ERP or CRM system. Instead, you use data lakes or one lakes or some of these other more advanced concepts to make it a little bit easier as well to really drive that. So it's a lot of fun in that regard to really see some of the things that we predicted in 2023 actually did get momentum and did move forward. One of the things that I've always said to my team and to others is the fact that I'm not here to predict beyond a year very easily, because if you think about it, like the AI emergence as an example, not many people got that. Not many people expected a large language model to basically progress as quickly as it did, right? So, like I said, I think for a year we can give some pretty accurate predictions in terms of where we're seeing the market go. But then after that, it becomes, as you know, much harder to predict. And the example I gave last stream was they told me 10 years ago that I would never use a mouse again, and I use it daily. So anyways, that's one of those things. So Carly, appreciate you joining from Moorhead. Hopefully the temperature is kind of nice there right now. Right now for us it's 18 degrees. I know in Fargo and actually in McHenry in North Dakota, where a lot of my family is from as well, it was like negative temperatures again. So hopefully you're staying warm. Carrie, appreciate it. Yeah, Mario Kart forever. That's what I did after school for quite some time in Annandale. I had to hang out with Peter Jung, Brian Dietz, and we'd go over and we would play on the Nintendo 64 Mario Kart. So a lot of good memories with this, obviously, as well. All right, so obviously BI and data is another one as well that we went through here. And the other big one that we tackled was going to be that cybersecurity perspective as well, because we knew, and this actually became even more emergent in 2024, as you probably know because of this, right? The AI craze that really hit the market and the focus around it, and also the frustration around it. And I want to address that today as well, because quite candidly, this is not something that's gonna disappear. It's not one of those technologies like HoloLens, right? Where it's not going to be moved upon or invested on, or it's not going to become bigger, right? I think there's been a lot of people that have been saying a lot of negative have a lot of negative perceptions around AI, and I get it. I mean, the problem, quite candidly, is we just don't know how to use it. I mean, that is the fundamental problem that we have in the market when it comes to artificial intelligence enablement inside of any system, whether it's video, audio production, or text-based production of any type. We still haven't figured out the best way to use that. And I will argue now that I think that is changing, and I think that people are starting to understand a little bit more of how we actually use these systems to really, really support, obviously, businesses and to make it easier and faster, right? So obviously these are the ones that we have that we talk through, and let's go through and just start talking about now, you know, what we're starting to see more towards the end of 2024 that is starting to absolutely impact what I see in 2025 as to where we're going to be going. And Rob, you nailed it. Like, it was really sad to see HoloLens as an example actually get kind of that axe, right? Because the HoloLens concept itself is fantastic. fantastic. Whether or not it's the HoloLens concept of directly beaming an image into your eye and then using that image basically to then overlay what you're interacting with, or even like with Apple's Vision, right, where you actually have cameras on the front that pass through basically the reality that you're in, right, or passes through basically the environment so that you can overlay stuff on it. So like I said, I think the biggest problem that I had with all of those, because quite candidly, team, like I was, that was one of those technologies I looked at and I was like, this is absolutely amazing. And this was like 4 or 5 years ago. But the problem is when we got one, was how heavy the device was, how clunky it was, right? And so that really caused a major problem, because what we were looking at using them for would have been like directed pick scenarios for warehouse workers, where basically imagine that you've got a queue of what you have to pick, and what it would do is it would overlay where you go as you move through the warehouse to go grab that product. And I thought that that was a really convenient, nice feature that warehouses could use in the future, as well as things like if you've got a forklift running around, it can warn you that there's another forklift oncoming. Like things like that, where you could take a warehouse and then enable it even further in terms of capabilities for the human workers, was a really attractive thing. But the price point, the capabilities, and also the technological offerings that were there, because if you think about it, the vision capability to overlay that wasn't as well thought out as it is now. So maybe what we'll start seeing here is a reemergence of that type of technology, but at this existing time, I think we're just going to see kind of just some other products that may come out that still use some of the augmented reality-based concepts, but it's not going to be like the HoloLens. It'll be a camera-based system more than likely that will drive that. Now, mind you, that could change as well, right? All right, so that being said, let's go through at a high level here and talk about some of the technologies that we were really considering here. So, and I haven't seen anyone post any, and I know, Rob, you said it was sad to see it. The backfill, hopefully it will be better. So here are the technologies that we've been kind of talking about that we feel will have some type of factor or influence, obviously, on the market. One of those, obviously, is going to be the craze that's happened with quantum recently. So if you've been living under a rock, I'll just give you a quick update. More towards the end of the year in December, Google announced a update of their quantum processor called the Willow processor. That processor has the ability to basically compute in a quantum way, meaning that instead of actually having a bit that represents data like we have in computers, which is a 1 or a 0, you have this concept of what are called qubits. And qubits can have more than a 1 or 0. They can be basically any number, if you can think about it through that lens, where that superposition, as they call it, is actually what drives what the information is that comes out of that particular system. And one of the problems that they've had with quantum-based concepts has been the fact that it's really hard to both, if you've gone through physics as a part of this, it's really hard to measure the direction and the speed of a particular qubit and be accurate with it. Because if you think about that, the error rate is another thing that happens with it, where we've had qubit-based machines now for over, I think, 10 years, but the accuracy of those have been just very, very bad. And so the Willow processor, one of the feats that they had as an engineering perspective with it is that they have been able to increase the accuracy rate of the output of that, where they did this one computational task that would have taken a traditional computer 9 septillion years to compute. Well, they did it with a Willow chip in like a minute or two or something like that. Now, great, right? In some ways, the example that they gave, there's been a lot of scrutiny around it, where it's like, hey, wait a second, you're stacking the deck here. You picked a scenario that really doesn't apply towards a lot of the challenges, for example, in business or just in the modern world, for that matter. And also, it raised some other concerns too. What about cryptography, right? Because one of the things about quantum computing is the fact that when it comes to breaking things like RSA cryptography, they can do it supposedly in minutes, theoretically, with quantum-based computers, but obviously not with traditional computers. So either way, there's a lot of hype around it right now. My wife has even been talking about it. She's in the arts area with narration. And in the arts, they're all fascinated around the quantum entanglement dilemma, where if you have an entangled pair of electrons or atoms, basically what you can do is you can actually read that same value across the world. And they've done some tests on this and have actually proven it to work. But it's one of those things where we've got a lot of work still to do to get to that next step. And I guess the big thing here is that you look at the investment vehicles that are out there from a technology and business system space. There's a lot of investors that are jumping onto that quantum bandwagon. But once again, it's one of those where will that have an impact maybe in 2025 for you as a business user? And I would argue no, it won't even be close to that. We're still 5 to 10 years, in my opinion, of actually getting to a point where we have valid quantum-based scenarios as well that are beyond than just these research type scenarios that businesses need. So once again, we should keep our eye on it, obviously, for 2025, but moving forward here, don't expect the quantum craze, as I call it right now, to really be anything that's substantial yet. Now, I would love to be corrected with that at some level, meaning if it does happen, we've got a lot of other problems. Like, I think people don't think about an emergent technology that is that disruptive. If they're able to really, in the next year, figure out the quantum-based capabilities, we've got problems then with encryption. We have problems with military encryption then as well with it, right? So there's a plethora of issues that just make it so it's like, well, I'm glad that people are investing in it because it is going to be something in the future that we're going to need to do. But once again, that's not going to be the case, I think, for 2025. Other technologies that we'll look at here, so like we've kind of looked at as well before, IoT and some of these others, they're going to continue to kind of scale as we go through this. So Internet of Things, as an example, for you that may not know about it, is just a way for devices to be able to phone home, to give data basically back to you, to I don't know, make it more accurate in terms of what you have to reorder, as an example, or to send telematic or telemetry-based information back from that device to headquarters to help with, for example, engineering and some of those additional concepts that are there as well. So like I said, IoT is one of those particular concepts that is also going to expand along with the data perspective. So I could almost take 2024's predictions and say, you know what, like, we're still on that progression or that path with it where we have data centricity in terms of data storage and capabilities that we're going to have to figure out even more. We're going to have IoT, more connected devices that are going to be there that we're going to be interacting with. We're going to see AI system adoption as well that even goes further than that as part of it, right? So once again, we're going to see these technologies in the business system space along with what I would classify as some consolidating factors as well. And what do I mean by that? So generally speaking, when we look at these emergent technologies like IoT, AI, one of the problems that every single software company has is basically aligning the existing stack of technologies and products to the new capabilities that are being introduced, for example, with a large language model. The example I love to give with this is, remember when we went through at the beginning of the year, really the Copilot enablement that happened more towards the end of 2023 from a Microsoft perspective. Remember the introduction of the sidecar, that was a whole new experience. The introduction in Business Central of the mini prompt that you have that you can pull out then and then prompt as part of it or ask a question about data, for example, which is now in other areas as well. And then even as well beyond that, the connectivity then of Copilot, of how you expand it, how you customize it, how you add then additional plugins or connect Power Automate to it to actually grab data and interact with it. Like all these different concepts from a platform perspective were really, really critical for 2024. And I think for 2025, we're going to see that exact same concept here, where the platform, the API layer, the debugging, for example, of AI-based systems, it's going to be front and center. And I think as well, one final thing just to note around this is that you're going to also start seeing pushback from technologists, me, maybe others, that say, you know what? You keep on looking at AI as electricity. Great that you're looking at it like that, but what are you using that electricity in, right? What are you trying to accomplish as the business goal regarding the output of what you're doing inside of an AI-enabled system, right? So like I said, I think these IoT-based concepts are going to be very, very critical when it comes, obviously, to even the AI craze that we have that's going on, to be able to interact more effectively with data as we do this. So that all being said, we're kind of 20 minutes in here. What is the future? Like, what if I could say, if I had one type of technology that I could say is going to be the most disruptive technology of 2025, what would I say it would be? And I candidly, I just go to agentic AI. I mean, I really do. So we've got all these different types of technologies, from quantum that's coming, to the base platform updates that we're going to continue to see, to IoT, you name it, service offerings from different partners now. You're going to see really an influx of people that are saying how much of an expert they are inside of AI as well, right? But really, the big thing here that AI is trying to address, that it's always tried to address, is the fact that it's used in automation scenarios, right? If we look back at Confab and the predictions that we have made in the past and the other years, 2023 we said was the year of automation. 2024 was the year of AI. Well, AI is a result of automation needs inside of businesses, whether or not it's making it easier to program and develop, for example, to create, for example, business-based systems or extensions to business systems, or if it's to address a specific capability without a business system to make something faster, better, or easier. AI is basically used in that automated perspective. And Rob, that's what I mean then by the agentic AI, right? 2025 might be the year of agents. I do think it is going to be that. And I think it's going to expand even further beyond that, where we're going to start getting into what we call multi-agent scenarios as well, that are really going to drive kind of those next steps. And one of the things that we're starting to concept at Stone Ridge is really that progression or that path that a customer should go down to basically understand how to use AI, how to use agents then inside of their business to be able to drive or automate some of those business processes. And I want to give some really high level, like if you're a leader that is already doing this type of stuff, once again, this Confab is all about the challenge. I'm always curious on what others' opinions are with this. But if you think about it, like when we look at the agentization of AI, what we're really saying is that we want AI to be more automated, so that when a task or a particular challenge comes into the business, that we then have a particular response that we want with that challenge. And one of the things that was a big failure point for the industry, and I think this is actually why I don't believe in the AI as electricity like that. I've heard that comment now a bunch of different times. I'm struggling a little bit with the AI as a UI. I get it, and I want to talk about that as well. But at the same point, what we're realizing with AI is it's very similar to the introduction of the Power Platform that we saw in the past. What do I mean by that? Well, in 2021, 2020, 2023, somewhere in that time period, as you recall, there was a lot of focus around the Power Platform, Power BI, Power Apps, Power Pages that got renamed and all that kind of stuff, right? All of those types of concepts obviously really started to lead into, what we're kind of looking at here, right? Where basically, as we've gone through these different types of implementations of AI in our business and what we've seen, what we've interacted with, a lot of the same misunderstandings of the Power Platform have happened in AI again. And I just find it very interesting. I find it interesting because a lot of people are like, well, Power Platform is going to make development just like that. It's like, no, it doesn't do that. You still do your analysis. You still have a business challenge. You identify what that challenge is. You basically create a document that says what that challenge is. You then identify what's the input and the output that you're trying to accomplish as part of that challenge. You then align the technology set to it. Then you write the code, which is like that small portion of the process, and then you test, you develop, and you go live with it as a part of it, right? So in those situations, the Power Platform didn't make didn't change the process per se. What it did is it made the process faster, right? Because now we had tools and we had access to resources that weren't pro dev type resources that could create, that could build, and that could then address a particular business challenge, albeit, you know, the argument would be like pro dev, we learn about architecture, about different types of concepts of how you actually architect, for example, an application, such as using MVVM or MVM type concepts. And architecturally, if you know what those acronyms are, those keywords are, you understand the concepts that are there, and maybe an end user that is a non-pro dev but is still a creator will not have, right? So those challenges, though, once again, are a business process challenge. Have your citizen developers have a center of excellence that has some type of certification process that an architect, a pro dev architect, can help guide these users as what to do next. So the Power Platform was that, and we saw that pretty consistently where people just thought that it was going to solve everything, and it really turns out that it didn't. And once people understood that it didn't solve everything, and they were able to take and find and identify where the savings were, well, it still turned out to be a fantastic deal because it still made it faster, it still gave more access to resources, and it made it so that you could develop line of business applications very quickly and rapidly as you went through your development lifecycle. AI, same exact thing. When AI is said as electricity, like if I said Copilot is electricity, really, that's not what it is. What Copilot is, or what AI systems are, is that they are another resource for you to interact with, but they're a computer that you interact with that can then take any type of input that you give to it and then produce some type of output related to it. And the correlation with electricity makes sense because if you think about it, electricity can be used in all these different devices that we have, right, that are there. This concept as well is kind of extended to what Satya said, right? So he was saying AI as a UI, or AI is our UI now that we interact with, our user interface. The problem I have with that is that many end users, you say UI, and they're like, what do you mean? What's a user interface with it? And if AI is my UI, if it's an agent, where it's not doing, I'm not touching it, I'm not interacting it, there's no user interaction potentially with this AI bot, because we can do that. AI is not UI then in that situation, because it's not a user interface for me to touch, interact with, or do something with. Now, you could argue the creator of that is that, right? But at the same point, I think the problem that we're having, obviously, with this is that people are really trying to create buzzwords and terms for something that they don't know yet. And I think that that is the problem that we've had, obviously, with these technologies, is just very much like the Power Platform. There's not a lot of experience or people that are using it. So what happens is that there are buzzwords and concepts that are introduced that don't hit the mark, that get refined, that continue to get refined, and then finally somebody gets it where they're like, oh, hey, this is how we do this, right? This is how we incorporate AI systems. And that's where we're at Stone Ridge. So just as an example around this, what we are looking at doing is basically creating that path that you need to basically go towards a world of using AI agents in your business. And that's why I feel it's actually going to be a really critical portion of it, because most of the scenarios that I get in my line of work are typically around automating systems very quickly and rapidly. And by using AI, I can do that very easily. So let's go through some of those examples just at a high level. And I'm even going to pop up the automated agent capabilities, obviously, of the Azure platform that we're going to look at, but it's going to be very, very interesting to see kind of where this goes. So with that, let's start just at the very base with it. So part of the offering that Stone Ridge has really been working on is focused around basically having different levels that you go through to help educate you on how you use AI or Copilot more specifically on the Microsoft platform. So what do we do with that? Well, number one, there's always this security and governance perspective that needs to be identified and talked through. And what we're doing at Stone Ridge is we're actually going through and building out what we call our Stone Ridge pre-flight checklist. So what we've done is we've kind of had some fun with this, where we're taking a lot of the different terms that are used with copilots. So an example would be, we've got a pre-flight checklist that basically goes through your tenant and identifies, for example, what you need to know to ensure that you are not sharing your data with Microsoft, or that you have the right DLP, data loss prevention policies in place to basically restrict what you're doing to interact, obviously, with Copilot. Because there are businesses out there, and even recently I was at one where they do not allow any AI, like at a very larger business that doesn't allow it, which is kind of atypical, to be quite candid. So there's just a lot of differences that are out there with it, and what we're looking at doing is helping people understand that base enablement. So that pre-flight checklist is another one that's an example of it. We've got what we call simulators that we're going to be creating, which are very similar to a proof of concept, because this is a new emergent technology. We don't have 10,000 different use cases to tackle with this yet. So what we're doing is we're looking at specific business needs, and what we're doing is we're teaching you how to fish as we go through this. And that is, to me, the most critical aspect of it. You don't use AI to solve the problem. You use your business process and you snap in AI to address the business challenges in that process. So one of the things that we are really pushing hard, and that we're starting to see a lot of success around with the customers, with the prospects that we interact with, is by basically saying, hey, back up. Look at this as a business challenge, identify the challenge, look at it like you would do custom development potentially to address it, but then ask yourself, is this something that a large language model can tackle, right? Because we saw earlier, and there's a LinkedIn user, the commercializing GPT LLM is the big disruptor. You absolutely nailed it. That is the technology concept here that you can iterate on to build things around. And what do I mean by that? So let's just show this, because once again, this is where I agree with I know Carly or somebody posted prediction 2025 equals the year of agents, and I firmly believe that. Like, candidly, we've been able to do this for the last 2 years technically as well. Like, one of the things people fail to understand, I think, in this entire journey that we're going on is that, remember, in 2022 and 2023, Microsoft focused on the base foundational Copilot infrastructure, which is the hardware level buying from NVIDIA, Intel, you name it, to basically allow then these inferences or these large language models to run on graphics cards that then are able to process basically the requests or the prompts that come to them. So once again, we've gone through a very pro-dev iteration that Microsoft did at the very beginning. Then they went through and added the Power Platform-based capabilities. And at the Power Platform-based level, I would argue that we've been able to do agents for quite some time. How? Well, what we could do is we could actually create an event that would happen inside of a flow, and in that flow we could connect then to a prompt, and we could do lots of cool things with that. We could actually iterate or loop inside of there, and we could actually make it so that when we received an email, for example, that we did something with that email. But here's the problem. The problem was that it requires a knowledge of Power Automate to do so, right? It requires more knowledge of how to do conditions, how to do loops, for example, inside of Power Automate. And what they're saying is that they want to make one user interface that is very quick and easy to do this in, to be able to create these agents that you can use without having to create a Power Automate flow for every different scenario that you're going to tackle as a part of it. That is where we get into what I'm showing here, which is going to be Copilot Studio, right? So Copilot Studio is the development platform for agents that we have always used in the Microsoft stack. So the example I love to give with this is that, remember, Copilot Studio, this was here before. Now, there's been lots of updates to it, but before it was Copilot Studio, it was called Power Virtual Agents. So there was an agent or bot framework that we have both on a pro dev perspective, which is the Azure bot framework, and then also on a citizen dev perspective, or Dynamics perspective, or business perspective is maybe the better way to term it nowadays. But what that is then basically the ability to create bots that were inside of Power Virtual Agents. agents. So when Copilot started to come and emerge as a part of it, what Microsoft did is they took that Power Virtual Agents technology set that was really connected heavily into Dynamics 365, and they started to reposition that as Copilot Studio. And the reason I mention this is because when it comes to this agent future that we're looking at, we have always actually had agent centricity inside of our particular AI environments and in our AI offerings from a Microsoft perspective, but we haven't had really the conglomeration, as I call it, of the M365 Copilot and the Dynamics Copilot all in one type of environment, and that is what Copilot Studio has become, and it will become even more in the future. Now, saying that means then as well that from a business perspective, when we start thinking about like why would an agent, like Scott, why would you say an agent is actually going to be a bigger push in 2025 than many of those other technologies that are emerging? And I think the key thing here is the fact that businesses are becoming very hyper-competitive in a market that seems to be moving faster year over year. What do I mean by that? It feels like the last year, I've never worked harder or faster and had more output in my life than I have my entire life. Like, just quite candidly. And I was trying to think about that. I was backing up and I'm just like, well, wait a second. Why is that? Like, it's not like we did more demos. It's not like we did more revenue. It's not like we did a lot of these different things that we were doing before, like last year as an example. But the amount of information, the amount of summary, the amount of responses, the amount of interaction, the amount of automation just seems to have scaled. And then I watched a news article regarding large language models, and what teams would do is they went through that. And what they would do is they would build a large language model, and it would take 6 months, and then they would test that model, and it would take another 6 months. And basically it would take a year to go through and then address, as you can imagine, some of those particular challenges that a business may have. Well, watching this podcast, they're like, yeah, we do the same thing now in 11 days. So 2 years ago, what would take a year for you to do in the AI space now takes 11 days. And in that space as well, you have the ability to not just create like one model, you could create 20 models, and as long as 2 of them are successful, still in that 11 days, you've gone through and iterated or prototyped even faster. And so what we're starting to see more and more and more is that this prototyping concept, when it comes to AI and agents, is accelerating, and it's going to continue to accelerate. And this is a warning. This is not, I don't believe in FUD, but I do want to plant the seed for everyone that's watching this stream as an example. If you're not investing in agents, you are going to have a problem. You just fundamentally are. Because what's going to happen, like just as an example, like let's talk through, like I can be very specific in our business as to what we see as things that we could do that would make the experience better for a customer, but not increase the amount of resources that we need. Examples of that, doing Business Central setup and configuration. We can now prompt a large language model, convert data, and even import that data by using prompts, where we can take a file, as an example, put that into basically Copilot, have it read that file of data. We could say it's all customers as an example. And then from there, we can say, hey, here's the template that you need to match that data at. Please match it, and then import those records into Business Central. We have code, we have the capability, and we do that now to be able to drive some of those scenarios. Now, what's really interesting about it is the fact that that could be something that a consultant uses, or that could be a customer experience potentially as well. And what does that mean? Well, that means that the cost of implementation is cheaper for you, the customer, potentially, because instead of actually having a human resource that we have to bill $200 an hour, $300 an hour, whatever the rate is, instead of having that type of rate of a person, instead you're using a machine to do a lot of that work and it's fairly accurate. well, that saves you money longer term. And we're really for that, to be quite candid, because understanding how to use AI systems to us is more important right now than basically doing all these different types of imports, right, to drive that. And the reason I say that is because everyone knows data imports are not fun. You've got characters and things of that nature that are in them that can make the imports fail. Well, especially in the SMB, or what we call the mid-market, having that type of capability is really important. So we could actually lower our implementation costs potentially by doing that. The other example I love to give is that in a statement of work, as an example, at the very beginning of an implementation, you identify what you're going to be implementing for that business system. We're going to be implementing sales and marketing that has sales orders, leads, and opportunities, so on and so forth. And what's really cool about it is that you could, as a partner, as an example, I'm not going to give too many of my examples away because this is the Stone Ridge differentiator that we look at as well with this from a partner perspective. But think about it like this. If I took that statement of work, we went through the implementation, and at the end, I had an AI agent that went through and basically scanned or went through all the different tables and identified what was set up and what wasn't set up so that it can correlate that to the statement of work and then identify or create a report that says, hey, this is what you had in your original statement of work in the business system. These are the configurations that are there, and this is what your output was. This should satisfy your statement of work. We could automate that. And we don't have to then have a person go in and dig into that data to do it. And we could do that as a value-added service as a partner to say, hey, what we said we're going to do, we did, and here's the verification document that says it. So these are concepts that AI and agents would allow us potentially to do, because we could build that agent, as an example, where I could prompt it to say, do a comparison of this statement of work to the Dynamics environment, and then from there it can generate that report. Well, these agents would allow for basically that to occur. So I've got some questions that came through here, and I think there's some really good ones that I want to look at. So Clyde made a comment. Well, Rob's, I think you'll have to talk to my agent, Rob, right? I'm going to talk about RAG with that too, which is going to be retrieval augmented generation, which is pretty cool with that. So, Clyde, if coding agents and other features with low-code, no-code approaches, we can build, test, and fail faster, debottlenecking the specification anxiety from getting something done. And Clyde, you nailed it. So if you think about AI and prototyping, it is all about increasing the capability and the rapid ability to implement said capabilities. Just as an example with it, I've said this before on Confab, I've got Wise cams that are everywhere, and I needed to pack my Wise cam. Basically, I don't remember all the SH script logic, right, that you have. Syntax is typically a developer's kryptonite, right? Because it's not that we don't understand if and case statements, conditionals, overloads, inheritance, like that stuff. Come on, like any developer in any language is going to understand that. But syntax is such a pain in the butt, making sure that my if has the right brackets around it, right? And what I will say is that, as an example with these Wise cams, I had an issue where they wouldn't have a static IP that would assign to them. So what I did is I used Copilot to basically create a SH script that I could upload to the camera that would then make it basically get an IP address, and I was able to use AI to do all the code that I did for that. And this is where it gets really kind of interesting, right? Because now you're taking a resource that may not natively know Perl or may not natively know SH script or Bash or anything else of that nature, and you're giving them the ability to create. And this gets even to user level capabilities. One of the things that I just like to kind of let people know about, and developers especially, is the fact that machines are going to be able to create better code than you in the future. Like, it's just, it's going to happen. Like, it's not to offend. It's not to say that your code isn't beautiful or that you do not have some uniqueness in the style or characteristics of the code that you create that may be, I don't know, easier to read than a machine, but the machine still gets the job done. And that's where understanding how to use these tools as a developer to audit, understand, to document, to create. Like, you still have to have the manager there going through and doing that, and that's really where that Copilot enablement is. So like you said, I think that this allows you then that low-code, no-code approach to even scale beyond that, where even people that don't understand how to write code in the first place can create without understanding those concepts. And I get it. It's a double-edged sword. We'll have to tackle it when we get there, but so was the Power Platform when it was introduced with Power Apps. So was Silverlight when it was the first XAML-based language that we used as well. So there's just a lot that's there that really drives that. So we got another one, Bean Counter. Thank you. Appreciate you posting. So what about manufacturing? So let's talk about that, because I think it's a really great scenario to kind of go through in terms of what those capabilities are that we could have or use with AI to drive that. Inside manufacturing plants, there's a significant amount of aging equipment. This old equipment has PLUs that aren't compatible or usable. These are essential for scheduling, tracking, etc. For machinery like mixes, extruders, ovens, etc. In order to take advantage of agents in the plant, well, companies need to reinvest into newer equipment or invest in equipment add-ons, or right type of a thing. So I appreciate that comment. It's like you nailed it, right? So part of the problem, remember, when we look at AI enablement inside of a business, one of the problems, and this is why IoT was last year's focus around it, but one of the problems that we have is the fact that you may have equipment that is not connected or can't be connected for some reason to be able to drive a particular business process. In manufacturing, there can be a couple of different scenarios with that, right? Excuse me. One of those might be, for example, that you've got a brake press, right? And that brake press is basically punching sheet metal constantly, right? And let's say, like you said, that the PLU, the Siemens controller, or whatever it is that you have, doesn't have the ability to report those punches that occur. And after a certain amount of punches, you need to, for example, maybe do some type of maintenance event, or maybe after a certain amount of time, you see a performance degradation of it, right, as a part of it. And the only way for AI to know about that is if it has the data to drive that, right? So it does really get into them being counter, like, what do you have to do in order to get this enablement around it, especially in the manufacturing space? And one of those is, if you're looking at new machines, make sure those new machines are IIoT. They're able to be read. You're able to get that data. And what I would say with that too is be very, very, very cautious on the partner that you choose that drives that. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of companies that black box that data interaction with their machines to then charge you a service fee to be able to access it, the privilege to access your information, right? Which is an interesting concept that I struggle with even today with vehicles and cars. Remember Tesla, they used to put a 100 kilowatt battery in there, but they'd only give you access to 60 until you did a software upgrade with it. I'm just like, I don't understand those types of concepts. But either way, when it comes to what you're asking about, the first would be, yeah, absolutely. Like equipment-wise, because we're in a digital space for this, for automation around AI, you're going to need, with these automated agents, to have an event that comes from that machine, some type of data event that occurs that then drives then the reaction to that. Just like a human being would. If they're walking by that brake press and all of a sudden they start hearing something that's really negative with it, well, they would then do an event to call the maintenance technician, right, as a part of it. So to be able to use this from a manufacturing perspective, you do have to make sure your machines have the ability to communicate that detail. Now, let's say they don't have the ability to do that. Your next portion of this question, do you invest in equipment add-ons? That would be the next step there. And then it might be actually using some very unique scenarios that are accurate enough to get you to your goal. So it could be equipment add-ons that you can buy that, now let's say with that brake press, it doesn't have that control unit, that PLU that you were mentioning, does not have or the PLC doesn't have the ability to phone home, for example. Well, maybe you can buy an add-on that has some type of a counter that can keep track of how many times that press is operated and when it's operated at, right? So that would be one scenario where maybe equipment add-ons are available for you to add that can then, at a minimum, connect to TCP/IP networks and then send information to a SQL database or even to a web service. So that would be another scenario to tackle. One final food for thought with this. Sometimes the machine or equipment doesn't need to have an add-on. Sometimes you can use other technologies to drive then the behavior or the reporting or the results that you want. As an example around that, as opposed to going through and buying this super expensive equipment add-on, what you could do is you could train a machine learning model that takes the sound of the press, and basically you put a microphone next to that press. And what will happen is as that press is operating, the microphone picks up basically that sound of that happening. It's been trained through a machine learning model to differentiate different types of noises that may be in the environment. This is things that we can do now. And then from there, it records that data without you having to have an equipment add-on or you buying a new machine to do that. Another example of that we use in agriculture. In agriculture, when we have harvest that occurs, when harvest is occurring, there can be super long lines when you actually have the grower bringing that product then to the co-op, right? Or to the facility that they're going to be dropping off that grain, or a grain facility of some sorts. Well, as a grower, if I'm harvesting, I don't want to send my driver to wait for 2 hours. I want them to go in, drop off, and I want to find a time where it's not as busy. Well, could you build a check-in, check-out system at the very front end of that entire line? Oh, absolutely. There probably is that too. Or could you use computer vision to put a camera in place that looks at that road and sees how far out it goes, and based upon the average unload time that you have, can calculate how long it's going to take for the truck at the very back to go through that line to then drop off that particular commodity or product then at that facility. And that is using nothing but adding a camera, for example, and then using some of the computer vision based capabilities to drive that. So I guess Bean Counter, just to kind of get to your question more corely here. Yeah, I think it's all of those. It's going to be, you should look at new equipment. It could be equipment add-ons that you look at. But remember, it can be a third-party, like human-like experience where you have a camera focused on something, and it is the one that's doing then the recording potentially, or the output of what that value would be that a person would see to then drive some of those particular business processes. So these agents, just to kind of highlight it, remember, if we look at these agents, and I just crack one open as an example, I'll do our sales Copilot, or we can even create one if I go to my all agents here as an example. What we'll see here then is that an actual agent itself, if I want to then take this agent and then potentially extend it, so we'll take like our sales Copilot agent as an example inside of here. So all I'm doing is I'm opening up Copilot Studio and I'm cracking open an agent so you can see what is this concept of the automated agent. And really, if you look down here and we go down into this is where triggers come into play that then create that experience now, where agents are not just agents that we interact basically with that particular Copilot, but where we actually go through and create a trigger so that it automates that action. And as you can see here, when I click on the add trigger here and we look at this, we have to turn on the orchestration for it. So you can see it'll actually go through and then turn on that generative orchestration for this particular Copilot. But then what it will allow me to access after it actually goes through and does that setup is then different types of triggers that can then call basically this Copilot to then take that data or take that information and then do something with it. And by default here, we've got, for example, when an item is created, or when an email arrives, or when a task is completed, or when something happens inside of Dataverse, for example, right? And the cool thing about this is that with just these right here, like just with these, I can pretty much create an agent in your environment that can be automated, that can run at any time I want to. And why is that? Because Dataverse I can access from almost any type of application. All Dynamics applications, for example, will connect to Dataverse. If we start looking at some of the other capabilities with Dataverse, like Power Platform, we connect to Dataverse as a part of it. And even in the future here, Dataverse becomes that bigger repository of information. So these particular triggers, coupled with the fact that we're going to be able to add triggers right in the future here, where maybe an agent is called when an inbound phone call occurs, for example, more directly, instead of having it to actually create a record inside of Dataverse, we're going to see these triggers really expand over time. So really what it boils down to here is that these agents now are going to allow us to basically go through and create a trigger, so we can centralize then the topics, the actions, the interaction then of that. And just as an example inside of here, if I even look at some of the system context with it, you can see here, you can even then go through and then customize them and extend them. And as an example here, I was showing really our team some concepts of what we can do to restrict Copilot access, because Copilot in Dynamics 365 doesn't yet have a user group set up where you can enable or disable users to access Copilot. Well, instead what you can do is, like for example on a trigger here, I'm showing an example of this where you can then end the conversation. You can see Copilot has been disabled for you in this environment, have a nice day, but then I've got all this other stuff that I can do as a part of it as well. So like I said, this is where we're going to start seeing more of this agentic AI, which is more of a Salesforce term, if I remember correctly. NVIDIA used it last month as well. Microsoft has called it automated agents, right, with triggers that are there. Either way, the point is that we're going to have agents that will allow us basically to call them and to process as a part of it. And this gets into some fun things then. And this is where I want you to start thinking through this a little bit more as well. So there is conversation that you have probably heard regarding a couple of things. Number one, AGI. So this is going to be artificial general intelligence is what that means. Basically, what that means is that the computer can do anything in the digital space that a human being can do, right? They're saying this year is going to be that year. It could be, maybe, maybe not. They've also said that superintelligence is 10 years out. Okay, well, superintelligence means that human beings can't understand the output, which is kind of interesting as well. But here's where I'm going with all of this. Inside of our models, we're going to see a rapid increase in what those capabilities are. And what I mean by that, ChatGPT 3.5 to 4.0, we saw coding examples from some of the coding tests that they did for humans. They went from like a 48% natively to 60%, and then with additional capabilities and additional focus around it, we were able to get that around a 98% level when we start looking at like GitHub, Copilot, and some of those other technologies that are there. So the accuracy continues to increase. The O1 that just came out, and then O3 came out after that, but O1 was the first concept of a large language model that does what we call a chain of thought, where it'll actually take a task and break it out and iterate on it to get to the output with it. It thinks per se. And what I'm starting to see more is that companies are starting to use really what we call RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, where we're taking additional context and data, typically in a vector database as an example, and when we create that prompt, we carry that with us to basically go through and then tackle or send that information in a prompt to the large language model as a part of it. But some of the concepts that we're going to start seeing here in 2025 are going to be agents that talk to each other, like automated agents that work out different scenarios. So as an example, you could create a Copilot agent that is a prompt front end, and that prompt front end could actually take what you actually have in terms of your prompt and then make it better. Right? And you could use an agent for that. That would be your prompting agent that would then come back with a better prompt, and then that prompt would actually go then to your large language model. And that's a multi-agent scenario where maybe then you're handing off information between these to tackle a particular task. Maybe what you do as well is that you have an agent that's a Did this satisfy the requirement agent, right? Which would be you go through that process, you take the input and output, you then go to that agent and you say, hey, how accurate is this? Can you give me this correlation or detail related to it using facts or a different prompt that's related to it? And then we could take that information and append it. So we start getting into these concepts with automated agents where we can create really small, powerful agents that act in a RAG approach. And Rob, to answer your question, retrieval augmented generation. And what that means is that we take additional detail based upon the prompt to then attach it to that prompt so that when it goes to the large language model, it has additional information. The example I love to use with that, look up all my emails and find the ones that Rob sent me. Well, then what it would do is it would actually go into Graph API to go through and then grab that detail, affix then a list of the emails, so that way when Copilot comes back with its response, it knows exactly what those emails are, date, time, subject, whatever it is that's passed over. But what we're doing is we're using retrieval to go get that information in a vector database, hopefully, which is the most performant scenario, to basically grab that information and then bring it back. So that, like I said, I think is going to be another area that we're going to start seeing some really interesting concepts that start playing out, where it's not an agent that tackles everything. It's an agent that tackles a specific task, as an example, and it's a fairly complex task, but it allows you to use prompts as opposed to programming language to basically address that particular need, which means that it opens up the world for many different users to basically create and interact then with machines by using AI and really the large language models that we have in our current stack to drive it. So that's kind of it. I know we're getting to time here. It's been a more of a conversational perspective, obviously, as well. A lot of good feedback here, right? Clyde, yeah, right to repair. I'm big in that right now, so hopefully that continues to get some momentum. I get proprietary. I understand trade secrets, but at the same point, having somebody have the ability to repair is always a big thing, right? And Clyde, you had another comment here. In addition to agentic approaches, we can improve operators and mechanics to be better agents by making it clear the value their subjective sensing, recording and understanding how their low structured data can be leveraged by AI. Their insights also feed where the smartest places and phenomena to monitor with IoT, and that's correct as well. Remember, we're going to have AI agents that look, for example, for different types of changes in data, right, to be able to basically see noise and then from there identify some type of a pattern, right, that makes it easier then for us to react. So once again, we're going to see a lot of really cool capabilities that are introduced even in the Dynamics platform, in the Microsoft platform, that addresses a lot of these needs over time. All right, team, with that, first and foremost, thank you again for the kickoff for 2025. We're super excited to obviously dive deeper into all these different areas. Obviously, every 2 weeks we're going to be doing this, so make sure you subscribe and stay connected. And if you have questions or comments, or if you want to know about a particular topic, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear more from you and understand more of what your challenges are, so that way obviously we can be teaching and talking through really what people need, not what the marketing team thinks that we need from Microsoft. I will say our marketing team, though, is very good at making sure that they are aligning with those needs. So like I said, just make sure to reach out with that. All right, team. With that, have a fantastic rest of your week, and we will talk to you 2 weeks from now. Thank you much.